A man, cold and ruthless, ties a sick Mustang to a tree deep in the wilderness. Alone, weak, and surrounded by the howls of hungry wolves, the horse closes its eyes, ready to meet its end. But just as the wolves close in, something extraordinary happens. Something that will change everything. Stay with us for a powerful story of survival, courage, and the unexpected bonds that defy all odds. The bitter chill of dusk settled over the Montana wilderness, painting the sprawling forest in shades of gray and amber. The world seemed still, save for the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of wolves echoing from the distant hills. Among the tranquility of nature, a grim scene disrupted the harmony. A Mustang horse, thin and trembling, stood tied to a towering pine tree, its head hanging low in exhaustion. The Mustang, once a proud creature of the wild, now looked like a ghost of its former self. Its ribs jutted out beneath its dull chestnut coat, every breath labored and shallow. A thick rope bit into its neck, tethering it tightly to the tree. The horse's legs quivered, its hooves digging weakly into the cold earth. It could barely stand, yet it was forced to face the cruelest of fates. A man stood nearby, his shadow stretching long in the fading light. John Harper, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, watched the horse with an expression as cold as the wind. His boots crunched against the frosted ground as he adjusted the rope, ensuring it wouldn't give way. "There's no use keeping you," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're more trouble than you're worth." The Mustang's large, glassy eyes briefly flicked to John, but there was no fight left in the animal. It was sick, its strength sapped by days of neglect. John had found the horse a week ago on his property, limping and clearly abandoned by its previous owner. At first, he'd thought of nursing it back to health, but with mounting debts and an already struggling ranch, he'd decided the horse wasn't worth the effort. John stepped back, pulling his coat tighter against the icy wind. The howls of wolves grew louder, closer. He glanced at the horizon, where the sun was sinking fast behind the jagged peaks. "They'll find you soon enough," he said quietly, almost to himself. He turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest without a second glance. The Mustang remained motionless, its head drooping as its ears flicked toward the distant howls. Night was falling quickly, and with it came the predators. The wolves, emboldened by hunger, would soon pick up the scent of a helpless animal. The horse shifted slightly, its legs wobbling beneath its weight, and let out a weak, mournful whinny. It wasn't a call for help. There was no one left to hear it. It was a sound of resignation, an acknowledgement of its fate. The first wolf appeared just as darkness blanketed the forest. Its glowing eyes shone like lanterns in the shadows, its sleek body moving silently through the underbrush. A second wolf joined moments later, then a third. They formed a loose circle around the tree, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The Mustang flinched, its nostrils flaring as the scent of danger filled the air. One wolf crept closer, its teeth bared in anticipation. It crouched low, ready to lunge, when suddenly a strange sound echoed through the forest. A high-pitched whistle, sharp and piercing, cutting through the tension like a blade. The wolves froze, their ears swiveling toward the source of the sound. The Mustang, too, raised its head slightly, its ears flicking forward for the first time in hours. The whistle came again, followed by a rustling in the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, carrying a lantern that cast flickering light across the scene. The wolves snarled, but hesitated, their eyes darting between the figure and the horse. The man stepped closer, and as he entered the dim light, his features became clear. A wiry old hermit with a weathered face and sharp, determined eyes. "Get out of here!" the man barked, swinging the lantern in a wide arc. The wolves growled but began to retreat, their instincts telling them this new arrival was not to be trifled with. The pack slowly disappeared into the darkness, leaving the Mustang and the man alone beneath the towering pine. The hermit approached the horse cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he took in its condition. "Well, aren't you in a sorry state?" he muttered, pulling a knife from his belt. The Mustang tensed, but didn't resist as the man carefully cut the rope, binding it to the tree. "Whoever left you here wanted you dead," he said, his voice softening. "But I reckon you've got some fight left in you yet." As the last strand of rope fell away, the Mustang collapsed to the ground, its legs too weak to hold it up. The hermit crouched beside it, placing a hand on its neck. "Easy now," he murmured. "We'll get you out of here." With surprising strength for his wiry frame, the hermit fashioned a makeshift sled from fallen branches and hauled the Mustang onto it. The horse didn't protest, its body limp with exhaustion. The hermit hitched the sled to his mule, and together they began the slow trek back to his secluded cabin deep in the forest. The Mustang's eyes fluttered shut as the rhythm of the mule's hooves lulled it into a restless sleep. For the first time in days, the horse wasn't staring death in the face, and though its journey was far from over, it had found something it hadn't expected in the heart of the wilderness: hope. The dawn broke over the forest, spilling golden light through the dense canopy of trees. The hermit's cabin sat in a small clearing, its rough wooden walls blending almost seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life in this isolated sanctuary. Inside, the Mustang lay sprawled on a bed of hay in a corner of the cabin, its shallow breaths the only sound in the stillness. The old hermit, whose name was Eli, moved quietly around the room. His wiry frame and weathered hands betrayed a life spent in solitude, carving out an existence in the unforgiving wilderness. He glanced over at the Mustang, his sharp eyes studying the animal's every twitch and movement. "You're a tough one," he muttered, stirring a pot of herbs and water over the fire. "Most wouldn't have made it through the night." Eli had seen his fair share of cruelty in his years, but finding the Mustang tied and abandoned had stirred something in him. He couldn't fathom what kind of man would leave a creature to die like that. As he worked, memories of his younger days surfaced, days when he'd lived in the world beyond the forest, where greed and neglect often overshadowed compassion. He shook the thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. The horse stirred, its ears flicking at the faint crackle of the fire. Eli approached slowly, holding a steaming bowl of the herbal mixture. "This'll help," he said softly, kneeling beside the animal. The Mustang tensed but didn't resist as Eli gently dripped the warm liquid into its mouth using a wooden spoon. The horse's nostrils flared, and its eyes opened slightly, meeting Eli's for the first time. In that brief moment, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them was ready to give up. Over the next few days, Eli devoted himself to nursing the Mustang back to health. He named the horse Ember, a nod to the faint spark of life that still burned within its weakened body. Every morning, Eli would gather medicinal herbs and forage for anything that could help restore Ember's strength. He cleaned the animal's wounds with care, his hand steady despite the horse's occasional protests. Ember began to show signs of improvement. Its coat, once dull and matted, started to regain a faint sheen. The horse's breathing became steadier, and its eyes grew brighter with each passing day. Eli noticed the change and allowed himself a small smile. "You've got fight in you after all," he said one evening, sitting on a stool beside Ember. "More than most folks I've known." Despite the progress, Eli knew they weren't out of danger yet. The wolves that had circled the Mustang before hadn't gone far. At night, their howls echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder of the ever-present threat. Eli kept a rifle by the door and a lantern burning through the night, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for movement. One morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eli decided it was time to see if Ember could stand. He removed the makeshift bandages from the horse's legs and stepped back, his heart pounding. "All right, Ember," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let's see what you've got." The Mustang's ears flicked toward Eli's voice, and it shifted slightly, its legs trembling beneath it. With a deep, shuddering breath, Ember pushed itself up, first onto its front legs, then its back. The effort was immense, and the horse swayed unsteadily, but it stood. Eli's chest tightened as he watched, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "That's it, boy. That's it." Ember took a tentative step, then another, its movements slow but deliberate. The sight filled Eli with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. He reached out a hand, and to his surprise, Ember took another step toward him, its dark eyes locking onto his. For the first time, the Mustang seemed to trust him. Eli spent the following days working with Ember, leading the horse outside to graze in the small clearing around the cabin. The animal grew stronger, its once sluggish movements becoming more fluid and confident. Eli marveled at Ember's resilience, the way it refused to be broken by the cruelty it had endured. But the wolves hadn't forgotten. One night, as Eli sat by the fire, Rusty, his old hound, began to growl low in his throat. Eli grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, his lantern casting flickering light over the clearing. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Eli's eyes scanned the tree line, and for a moment he thought he saw a pair of glowing eyes watching from the shadows. Eli tightened his grip on the rifle. "Not tonight," he muttered. "You won't take him tonight." Inside the cabin, Ember stood near the window, its ears swiveling at every sound. The Mustang's strength had returned, but its spirit, its will to fight, burned brighter than ever. Whatever lay ahead, Eli knew one thing for certain. Ember wasn't just a survivor, he was a fighter, and together, they would face whatever the wilderness had to throw at them. The wind carried a sharp chill through the forest as dawn broke, illuminating the clearing where Ember stood grazing near the cabin. Eli leaned against the cabin's doorway, watching the Mustang with quiet admiration. The horse had come a long way from the frail, defeated creature he'd found tied to that tree. Ember's coat now glistened in the early sunlight, the scars on his legs still visible but healing. His movements were more confident, his head held higher with every passing day, but there was unease in Eli's chest. The wolves hadn't been seen in days, and their silence only heightened his sense of foreboding. The wilderness was rarely kind, and Eli knew better than to let his guard down. He grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder, stepping into the clearing. "We need to stretch those legs of yours, boy," he said, his voice breaking the morning stillness. Ember flicked his ears in response, lifting his head from the grass. Eli fashioned a simple lead rope from a length of sturdy twine and approached the Mustang cautiously. Though Ember trusted him more with each passing day, there was still a wildness in the horse's eyes, a reminder of the untamed spirit that had kept him alive. "Easy now," Eli murmured, looping the rope around Ember's neck. The horse snorted softly but didn't pull away. Together, they ventured into the woods. The towering pines cast long shadows over the forest floor, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft green blanket. Ember walked beside Eli, his hooves crunching softly against the earth. Eli kept a firm hand on the rope, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. "This world's got its dangers," he said, more to himself than to Ember, "but you're stronger now. You'll be ready for whatever comes." As they walked deeper into the forest, Ember began to relax, his steps growing more confident. Eli led him to a shallow stream, where the horse drank deeply, his muscles rippling beneath his coat. Eli knelt by the water, splashing some on his face. The cold was invigorating, a reminder of the life pulsing through the wilderness. For a moment, it felt as if the world had paused. The forest was quiet, save for the soft babble of the stream and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Eli watched Ember, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're a fighter," he said. "Always have been." But the peace didn't last. The faintest rustle of leaves reached Eli's ears, so subtle that most wouldn't have noticed. He froze, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung over his shoulder. Ember lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward the sound. The forest, so tranquil just moments ago, now felt heavy with tension. Eli stood slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. The rustling grew louder, closer. His grip on the rifle tightened as a low growl echoed through the woods. A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, followed by another and another. The wolves had returned. The pack emerged into the clearing, their sleek bodies moving silently through the underbrush. Ember snorted, his muscles tensing as he backed closer to Eli. The wolves circled slowly, their eyes locked on the Mustang. Eli raised his rifle, aiming at the largest of the pack. "Not today," he muttered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The alpha wolf let out a low growl, its sharp teeth bared as it stepped closer. Eli fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing through the forest. The wolves flinched but didn't scatter. Instead, they crouched lower, their bodies coiled like springs ready to pounce. Eli knew he couldn't take them all down. The wolves were too many, their hunger driving them to take risks they wouldn't normally consider. He glanced at Ember, who was now pawing the ground, his nostrils flaring. The Mustang wasn't just scared, he was ready to fight. As the wolves crept closer, Eli made a decision. He dropped the rope and stepped back. "Go, Ember!" he shouted. The Mustang hesitated for only a moment before rearing up, his powerful legs striking the air. With a defiant cry, he charged at the wolves, his hooves thundering against the ground. The wolves scattered, their snarls turning to yelps as Ember lashed out with his hind legs. The alpha wolf lunged, but Ember dodged with surprising agility, his movements fluid and precise. Eli watched in awe as the horse, once so weak and helpless, fought back with the strength and determination of a true survivor. Within moments, the pack retreated, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Ember stood in the clearing, his sides heaving and his eyes blazing with triumph. Eli approached cautiously, his heart pounding. "You did it, boy," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You faced them down." Ember snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along he could. Eli chuckled, placing a hand on the horse's neck. "You're something else," he said, "something else entirely." As they made their way back to the cabin, the forest seemed lighter, the shadows less imposing. Eli glanced at Ember, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The Mustang had proven himself not just a survivor but a fighter, a creature of strength and spirit that refused to be broken. And Eli knew, as they walked side by side through the wilderness, that they were stronger together than they ever could have been alone. The crisp morning air carried a sense of calm as Eli opened the cabin door. Rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Ember grazed peacefully in the clearing, his ears swiveling with every sound. The wolves were gone, and for the first time in weeks, Eli allowed himself to relax. But deep down, a lingering unease gnawed at him. The wilderness had its way of testing even the strongest. Eli stretched his back, his rifle slung across his shoulder as he prepared for the day's chores. His routine hadn't changed much since taking Ember in, gathering firewood, checking his snares, and foraging for herbs. But the presence of the Mustang had added a layer of purpose to his solitary life. He had someone to care for now, someone who relied on him, and, in a way, Ember had brought Eli a kind of companionship he hadn't felt in years. As he approached the edge of the clearing, something caught his eye. Tracks, large, deep imprints in the soil, unmistakably left by horseshoes. Eli knelt down, running his fingers over the marks. They were fresh, too fresh to ignore. A chill ran down his spine. "Someone's been here," he muttered under his breath, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line. The thought of someone intruding on his isolated sanctuary unsettled him. Most folks in the area knew better than to venture this deep into the forest. Whoever it was, they had a reason for being here, and Eli doubted it was a good one. By midday, Ember had grown restless. The Mustang pawed at the ground, his nostrils flaring as if sensing something was off. Eli noticed the change in the horse's demeanor and tightened his grip on the rifle. He trusted Ember's instincts. Animals often felt danger before it was visible. "Easy, boy," Eli said softly, approaching the Mustang. "We'll figure this out." The sound of hooves broke the silence, faint at first but growing louder. Eli's body tensed as he turned toward the noise. From the trees emerged 3 men on horseback, their faces obscured by wide-brimmed hats and scarves. They moved with a purpose, their eyes scanning the clearing until they landed on Ember. "There he is," the tallest of the group said, his voice gruff. He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. "Told you he'd be here." Eli stepped forward, positioning himself between Ember and the men. "This is private land," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You've got no business here." The man chuckled, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "That horse doesn't belong to you, old man. He's ours. Took off during a storm a while back. We've been looking for him ever since." Eli's jaw tightened. That horse was left for dead, tied to a tree like garbage. Doesn't sound like the kind of care a real owner would give. The man's expression darkened. "Doesn't matter how you found him. He's ours, and we're taking him back." Eli raised the rifle, aiming it squarely at the man's chest. "You're not taking him anywhere." For a moment, the clearing was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The other 2 men shifted uneasily in their saddles, their hands hovering near their own weapons. Ember, sensing the hostility, snorted and took a step closer to Eli, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the man said, his tone laced with mockery. "But you're outnumbered. You really think you can stop us?" Eli's grip on the rifle tightened. "I don't care how many of you there are. That horse isn't going anywhere." The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to back down. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady. He'd faced danger before. Wolves, storms, the unforgiving wilderness, but this felt different. These men weren't just a threat to Ember, they were a threat to everything Eli had come to care about. The man raised his hand, signaling to the others. "We'll be back," he said, his voice low and menacing, "and next time, we won't be asking." With that, the men turned their horses and disappeared into the trees, leaving Eli and Ember alone in the clearing. Eli lowered the rifle, his mind racing. Whoever those men were, they weren't going to give up easily, and he had no intention of letting Ember fall back into their hands. That evening, Eli worked tirelessly to fortify the cabin. He reinforced the doors and windows, set traps around the perimeter, and kept the rifle loaded and within reach. Ember stood near the cabin, his eyes scanning the shadows as if keeping watch. The Mustang had become more than just a companion. He was a partner in survival, a living testament to resilience. As the moon rose high above the forest, Eli sat by the fire, his thoughts heavy. The wolves had been a test of strength, but this was different. This was a battle of wills, a fight for what was right. He glanced at Ember, who stood tall and proud despite the scars on his body. "We'll face them together," Eli said quietly, "no matter what." The forest was unusually quiet the next morning. Even the birds seemed hesitant to break the silence as Eli stepped out of the cabin, his rifle resting on his shoulder. Ember stood grazing near the tree line, his ears twitching at every faint rustle. The Mustang's body was relaxed, but his watchful gaze told Eli everything he needed to know. The men would be back, and they wouldn't come alone. Eli had spent most of the night preparing for their return. He had fortified the cabin, set traps around the clearing, and mapped out every potential blind spot. Years of living in the wilderness had taught him how to defend what was his, and he wasn't about to let a group of hired thugs take Ember without a fight. The morning passed slowly, every moment stretched thin with tension. Eli moved through his routine with practiced efficiency, but his mind remained on the previous day's encounter. He replayed the men's words, their threatening tone, the way their eyes had lingered on Ember. They weren't going to stop. They saw the Mustang as property, a tool to be used, and they'd do whatever it took to get him back. By midday, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Eli froze, his pulse quickening as he grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. 4 men emerged from the tree line this time, each one armed and mounted on powerful horses. The leader, the same tall man from before, wore a cruel smirk as he dismounted. "I told you we'd be back," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. Eli raised the rifle, his stance unwavering. "I don't take kindly to trespassers." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You're out of your league, old man. There's 4 of us and 1 of you. Be smart. Hand over the horse and we'll leave you in one piece." Ember snorted, pawing the ground as if sensing the danger. Eli glanced at the Mustang, his resolve hardening. "This horse isn't yours. You abandoned him, left him to die. That makes him mine now." The leader's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you." The standoff escalated quickly. One of the men drew his pistol, but before he could aim, Eli fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the clearing, startling the horses and sending a flock of birds flying from the trees. "Next one won't miss," Eli said, his voice low and steady. The leader held up a hand, signaling his men to hold back. "You think you can take all of us?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You're just one man." Eli smirked. "One man who knows these woods better than you ever will." As if on cue, one of the traps Eli had set earlier snapped shut, catching one of the men's horses by the leg. The animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. The man scrambled to his feet, cursing as he tried to free the horse. Eli took the opportunity to step back towards the cabin, keeping the rifle trained on the remaining men. "Leave now, and no one else gets hurt," Eli said. "But if you step 1 foot closer, I won't hesitate." The leader's face twisted with rage, but he seemed to understand that Eli wasn't bluffing. He turned to his men, barking orders. "Get him, and get that damn horse." The next few moments were a blur of chaos. One of the men charged toward Ember, a lasso in hand, but the Mustang reared up, his powerful hooves striking the air. Eli fired another shot, this time grazing the man's shoulder. The attacker fell back, clutching his arm as his horse bolted into the trees. Ember, fueled by instinct and fear, lunged forward, breaking free of the rope, tethering him to the clearing. He charged at one of the remaining men, his hooves striking the ground with thunderous force. The man panicked, his horse stumbling as he tried to retreat. Ember's wild, untamed energy was a force to be reckoned with, and even the seasoned riders couldn't keep up. Eli used the distraction to his advantage. He aimed for the leader, who was now backing toward the tree line, his eyes darting between Eli and Ember. "This isn't over," the man growled, before turning his horse and disappearing into the forest. The others followed, their retreat hasty and disorganized. As the dust settled, Eli lowered the rifle, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Ember stood in the center of the clearing, his sides heaving and his eyes blazing with triumph. The Mustang's defiance had been key to driving the attackers away, and Eli couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He approached the horse slowly, his voice soft. "You did good, boy. Real good." Ember snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along how it would end. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "We're not done yet," he said. "They'll be back, but we'll be ready." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clearing in golden light, Eli set to work reinforcing his defenses. The fight wasn't over, but he and Ember had proven they were more than capable of holding their ground. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. A man and a Mustang bound by resilience, determination, and an unshakable will to survive. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. Eli paced near the cabin, his rifle in hand, his mind racing with thoughts of the men who had fled earlier. He knew their retreat was temporary. Men like that didn't take defeat lightly, and they'd return, stronger, angrier, and more determined than before. Ember stood nearby, his ears swiveling toward every faint noise. The Mustang's powerful frame was taut with tension, his instincts sharper than ever. He had faced wolves, illness, and cruelty, and now he stood as a defiant protector of the life he had reclaimed. Eli looked at the horse and felt a surge of pride. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Eli spent the remaining daylight preparing for what he knew would be the final confrontation. He reset the traps around the perimeter, sharpened the blades of his knives, and ensured every bullet in his rifle was accounted for. His old hound, Rusty, trotted at his heels, his graying muzzle a reminder of the years they had shared in solitude. Tonight, the cabin wouldn't just be a shelter, it would be a fortress. As darkness fully descended, the forest came alive with sound. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the faint crunch of footsteps. Too faint for most to notice, but not for Eli. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the tree line. They were here. The first sign of their approach was the glint of lantern light filtering through the trees. 4 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses moving in a tight formation. This time, they weren't playing games. The leader, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face, dismounted with purpose. He carried a shotgun, its polished barrel gleaming in the moonlight. "We're not leaving without the horse," the man called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You've got one last chance to hand him over." Eli stepped out from the cabin, his rifle raised. "I don't think you understand," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "This horse isn't going anywhere, not with you." The man smirked, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "You're a stubborn old fool, but stubbornness won't save you." The air grew heavy with tension as the men spread out, their weapons drawn. Eli's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. He had faced danger before. Wild animals, brutal storms, the unforgiving wilderness. But this felt different. This was a test of his resolve, a fight for what he believed in. "Rusty," Eli said quietly, glancing at the hound. The dog's ears perked up, and he darted into the shadows, disappearing from view. Eli knew Rusty would take up a position near the traps, ready to create a distraction if needed. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. One of the men fired into the air, a warning meant to intimidate. But Eli didn't flinch. He took aim and fired back, the crack of his rifle echoing through the clearing. The bullet struck the ground near one of the men's horses, causing the animal to rear and throw its rider. Chaos erupted. Ember, sensing the danger, reared up, his powerful legs striking the air. One of the men tried to lasso the Mustang, but Ember lunged forward, breaking free of the rope. The horse charged toward the attackers, his hooves thundering against the ground. Eli fired another shot, this one grazing the shoulder of the leader. The man cursed, stumbling back as blood stained his shirt. The remaining riders hesitated, their confidence shaken by Ember's ferocity and Eli's precision. But the leader wasn't ready to give up. "Take him down," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. Eli retreated toward the cabin, using the structure as cover. He fired another shot, this one striking the leg of a man attempting to flank him. The attacker cried out, falling to the ground as his horse bolted into the forest. Rusty emerged from the shadows, barking fiercely as he darted toward the men, drawing their attention away from Eli. Ember's wild energy was the turning point. The Mustang charged at the leader, his hooves striking with terrifying force. The man raised his shotgun, but before he could fire, Ember reared up and knocked the weapon from his hands. The leader stumbled, his eyes wide with fear as the Mustang stood over him, a living embodiment of the untamed wilderness. "Call them off," Eli shouted, his rifle trained on the remaining attackers, "or you won't walk out of here." The leader hesitated, his gaze shifting between Eli and Ember. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. "Fall back," he yelled to his men. "It's not worth it." One by one, the attackers retreated, disappearing into the forest like shadows. Eli lowered his rifle, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Ember stood tall, his sides heaving but his spirit unbroken. The Mustang snorted, tossing his head as if to say he'd known all along how it would end. As the clearing fell silent, Eli approached Ember, his hand resting on the horse's neck. "You did it, boy," he said softly. "You showed them what you're made of." The Mustang leaned into Eli's touch, his wild eyes softening. Together, they had faced the odds and come out stronger. The men wouldn't return, not after what they had seen. Eli knew that the wilderness had its own way of enforcing justice, and tonight it had been served. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Eli stood with Ember in the clearing, both of them battered but undefeated. They had fought not just for survival but for freedom, and in doing so they had forged a bond that nothing could break. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the clearing where Ember stood tall and proud. His chestnut coat shimmered in the soft light, the scars on his legs a reminder of everything he had endured. Nearby, Eli leaned against the cabin's porch, his rifle resting by his side. For the first time in weeks, the air felt light, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The men who had come for Ember were gone, their arrogance shattered by the defiance of a Mustang and the resolve of a man who refused to back down. Eli knew they wouldn't return. The wilderness had taught them a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Ember grazed quietly in the clearing, his ears flicking toward the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The Mustang had been through hell, but he had emerged stronger, a testament to resilience and the unbreakable spirit of the wild. Eli watched him with a sense of pride and admiration. The horse had saved himself, but in doing so he had also saved Eli. The cabin had always been a place of solitude, a refuge for a man who had chosen to live apart from the world. But Ember had changed that. The Mustang's presence had brought life back into Eli's days, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there was still room for connection and hope. Eli walked to the edge of the clearing, where Ember lifted his head to meet his gaze. The horse's dark eyes were calm now, no longer clouded by fear. Eli reached out, placing a hand on Ember's neck. "You're something special, you know that?" he said, his voice soft. "They tried to break you, but you didn't let them." Ember snorted, his breath puffing in the cool morning air. Eli chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "I think it's time," he said. "Time for you to go back to where you belong." Eli spent the next few hours preparing. He removed the makeshift halter from Ember's neck, running his hand along the horse's mane one last time. The Mustang stood still, as if understanding what was about to happen. Eli opened the gate to the clearing, stepping aside to let Ember see the path ahead. "You've earned it," Eli said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Go on now. Run free." For a moment, Ember didn't move. He looked at Eli, his dark eyes reflecting something unspoken, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. Then, with a powerful leap, he took off, his hooves thundering against the ground as he disappeared into the forest. Eli watched him go, a bittersweet smile on his face. The clearing felt emptier now, but it wasn't the same as before. Ember's presence had left a mark, a reminder that even in the deepest solitude there was always the possibility of connection. Weeks turned into months, and the forest settled back into its familiar rhythm. The wolves returned to their distant hills, the men stayed far away, and Eli continued his quiet life in the cabin. But every so often, as he walked through the woods or sat on the porch, he would catch a glimpse of a chestnut figure moving through the trees. Ember was out there, free and wild, just as he was meant to be. And though he no longer lived in the clearing, Eli felt his presence as surely as if he were standing beside him. The wilderness had a way of testing those who called it home, but it also had a way of rewarding those who stood firm. For Eli and Ember, their story wasn't just one of survival. It was a testament to the power of resilience, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the wild. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a warm golden glow, Eli leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the tree line. Somewhere out there, Ember was running free, a symbol of everything the wilderness stood for: strength, freedom, and the enduring spirit of life. And for Eli, that was enough. Freedom is not just about survival. It's about reclaiming what was meant to be yours. This is the story of Ember, a Mustang who defied all odds, proving that courage and resilience can overcome even the cruelest of trials. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories of strength and connection. Together, we can spread a message of hope, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Let's make sure no life is ever left behind.
The auction yard stank of sweat, diesel, and desperation. Men shouted over each other, throwing up stained bills like it was a sport. Mud clung to boots, smoke clung to skin, and under the rusted floodlights, the animals waited like ghosts. Then came the sound of dragging chains. The crowd turned. A German shepherd was pulled onto the platform. Its ribs jutted out like broken blades, one eye swollen shut, the other glowing with something primal. The snarled muzzle strapped so tight it drew blood. People stepped back. One man spat, muttering about devil dogs. Another laughed, called it a killer. The auctioneer banged his gavel once. Savage, military, unpredictable. Starting bid, $100. No hands, only silence. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a small hand rose. A girl, no more than 7, walked forward. Dirt-smudged dress, shoelaces undone, She held a crumpled envelope in both hands, arms shaking. The crowd murmured. Someone scoffed. Someone else asked where her parents were. The auctioneer squinted. "You bidding, sweetheart?" She nodded, eyes locked on the dog, unblinking. He laughed. "You serious?" He took the envelope, counted the bills. Mostly ones. Some change. $83.20. "That's all you got?" The girl nodded again. The man shrugged. "Sold to the little angel with the death wish." People clapped, some out of mockery, others just for the show. The chain was handed to her like a joke. But the moment she touched it, the shepherd froze. His growl died in its throat. One eye met hers. Something shifted. As she turned to walk, the dog followed. Not pulling, not resisting. Just following. Back home, the house was a decaying two-story on the edge of the woods. Inside, her foster father slammed his beer can down so hard it cracked. "You bought what?" The mother's voice came sharp from the kitchen. "We said no more strays. No more of your animal phases." The girl didn't speak. She never did. The dog was tied to a pole outside. Tight. Rain began. Wind picked up. The girl watched through the cracked window as thunder rolled overhead. At midnight, she crept out barefoot, blanket around her shoulders. She sat beside the dog, shivering. He growled. Low. A warning. But she didn't flinch. She whispered to him. Not words. Just memories. Porch. A garden. A dog that never came back. Her fingers grazed the shepherd's scarred fur. The growling stopped. He shifted closer. She leaned her head against his chest. Morning came. Mud on her feet. Blanket soaked. Her foster father cursed when he saw her curled beside the beast. You're gonna get ripped apart. But she didn't move. That night, the dog barked at the door. Once. Twice. Nobody answered. The girl was missing. Panic. Flashlights. Screaming into the woods. Then she was found. Sitting by the stream. The dog between her and a dead coyote. Blood on its teeth. Her hand on its neck like it belonged there. Nobody knew how to explain it. The papers didn't care. Just another forgotten girl in another forgotten town. Back at home, the chain was tightened. One night later, the girl sat on the back porch. The shepherd tied beside her. Both watching the sky. Quiet. Then the chain snapped. The dog lunged. She didn't scream. It stopped an inch from her face. Breathing heavy. Eyes locked. And then it did something no one expected. It bowed its head. The dog didn't move for hours after that night. It just sat by her door, head low, ears twitching at every creak in the floorboards. Emma, still wordless, pressed her fingers to the glass and mouthed something no one heard. Her foster parents pretended it didn't happen, but locks were added to the inside of her room. They didn't ask where the bruises came from. They didn't ask why she refused to sleep without the dog near. The shepherd's name came out in a whisper. She didn't say it aloud, just traced it into the dirt with her finger. Shadow. He began responding only to her. Not to food, not to shouts, only to her presence. When she drew pictures, he watched. When she cried in silence, he rested his head in her lap. When thunder came, he stood in the doorway like a soldier guarding a palace. One night, a flash of headlights lit the driveway. A man stepped out of a black car. Leather gloves, pressed shirt, hollow eyes. He looked once at the house, once at the dog, then turned and left. Shadow's growl was low, shaking, ancient. Emma began noticing things. Shadow reacted to sirens. He'd shake when she opened soda cans. Once, she dropped a frying pan and he lunged at the wall, snarling at shadows that weren't there. His past wasn't just wounds. It was buried inside him, alive. In the basement, Emma found a box of her things the foster family never gave her. Among the drawings and old clothes, a photo, blurred. A backyard, a woman's legs, a young Emma, and a German shepherd beside her. Not Shadow, but almost. Same eyes, same stance. She ran outside, photo clutched in hand, storm raging. Shadow barked once, then stopped as she collapsed beside him. That night, she whispered a secret to him. The kind kids don't tell anyone. About a house that burned. About people who never came back. About voices she still heard when she closed her eyes. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just listened. And in the silence, he pushed his muzzle into her chest, heartbeat to heartbeat. The next morning, the fence behind the house was torn open. The neighbor's chickens were untouched. But Shadow had blood on his teeth. Not animal blood. Emma followed his paw prints to the edge of the woods. There, buried shallow under the leaves, a glove. Black leather. Blood-soaked. Next to it, a flashlight. Military issue. Numbers scratched into the side. She took them inside, laid them on the kitchen table. Her foster mother screamed. Her father slapped them off the table, screamed about lies and trouble and how they never should have taken her in. But Emma just stared. Not at them, at Shadow. He was watching the door. That night, the window shattered. A boot stepped into her room. Shadow didn't bark. He waited until the man was 2 steps from Emma's bed. Then he moved like lightning, crashing, snapping, snarling. The man screamed. A gun fired once, missed. Shadow tore through him like paper. The man crawled out, blood in his footprints, vanishing into the night. Police came. No report filed. Foster father said it was a raccoon. Shadow was chained tighter. Animal control was called. Emma didn't cry. She sat beside Shadow, her arms wrapped tight around his neck. He was shaking, blood still in his fur. The truck arrived the next morning. Steel cage. Sedation needle. The officer reached for the leash. Emma stepped in front. No words, but her eyes screamed. Shadow didn't growl. He stepped beside her, touching her arm gently with his nose. The officer froze. Something in the way he looked at her, like a soldier returning home. Still, rules were rules. They lifted him into the cage. The gate slammed shut. As the truck rolled away, Emma pressed her hand against the rear window, and Shadow, through the bars, did the same with his paw. 2 soldiers separated again. But not for long. The shelter reeked of bleach and fear. Rows of cages lined the concrete walls, each holding a creature broken by something. Neglect, cruelty, or time. Shadow lay in the farthest corner, chained twice, eyes open but unfocused. He hadn't moved since they brought him in. Not for food, not for water, not for the barking around him. Only when a child's voice echoed from the hallway did his ears twitch. Emma stood on the other side of the glass, small palms pressed flat. Her breath fogged the surface. No one knew she'd run away. No one saw her climb through a window and walk 5 miles in the dark. But she was there, and so was he. The shelter staff didn't notice her at first. But when they did, panic followed. Calls made. Doors locked. She was too young, too quiet, too determined. One volunteer, a woman with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, pulled her aside. Instead of shouting, she knelt. "I've seen the way he looks at you," the woman said. "That dog doesn't trust anyone. But he watches you like he remembers something." Emma didn't answer. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the glove and flashlight. Showed the woman. Pointed to the scratched numbers. The woman's face changed. She took the items and vanished into the back. Hours passed. Emma refused to leave. Then the woman returned, this time with a file. Torn, water-damaged, half-burned. Inside, military papers. Photos. One name circled in red. Lieutenant Kyle Brennan. Missing in action. Presumed dead. Handler of a specialized K-9 unit. The photo showed him smiling, arm around a German shepherd. It wasn't just any dog. It was Shadow. Younger, stronger, untouched by whatever came after. Emma traced the lines on his face, the curve of the dog's ear. She pointed to the tag number on the flashlight. It matched. The woman's hands trembled. This dog. He was more than military. He was classified. Off books. Emma's eyes didn't blink. That night, the shelter was broken into. Files shredded. Computers smashed. Cages torn open. Dogs missing. Shadow's cage was still there. But he was gone. Emma didn't cry. She ran. Through the rain. Back to the woods. Back to the place they buried the glove. And there, waiting like he knew she'd come, was Shadow. Muddy, bleeding, but alive. He dropped something at her feet. A photo. Burned edges. It showed a group of soldiers standing in front of a blacked-out building. Faces scribbled out in red. Except for one. The same man from the shelter file. Lieutenant Brennan. Behind the building, a blurry logo. Government. Foreign. Unclear. Emma picked it up. Her hands shook. Back at the house, her foster parents were on the phone. Arguing. Whispering. Mentioning payments. Someone was watching them. Black SUV parked a block away. Unmoving. She slipped past them into the basement. Pried open the floorboards beneath the stairs. A metal box. Inside dog tags. Military insignia. A journal with pages torn out. And a single photo of her biological parents. Happy. Alive. Holding a German Shepherd puppy. The pieces clicked. Her real family had known something. The dog remembered her scent not from instinct, but from memory. Shadow wasn't a stray. He was her protector. Always had been. She climbed out of the basement, breath ragged. Outside, Shadow stood in the driveway, staring into the dark. The SUV headlights flashed once. A warning. Shadow growled, low and sharp, his body between Emma and whatever watched them. She stepped beside him, small hand resting on his back. Neither moved. Somewhere, deep in the woods, a gun clicked. The storm was far from over. The knock came just after sunset. 3 sharp raps. Calm. Measured. Emma stood frozen in the hallway, Shadow by her side, tail stiff like a drawn line. Her foster father opened the door with hesitation. On the porch stood a man, trench coat soaked with rain. One eye covered in scarred flesh, the other locked on the shepherd. Shadow didn't bark. He stared. A beat passed, then his ears dropped slightly. The man spoke with a voice that didn't shake. "That dog belongs to me." Her foster father laughed once. Nervous. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Kyle Brennan," he said. "Retired. Classified. And if you value breathing, you'll move." Emma stepped into the light. The man's face cracked. Not with surprise, but recognition. She held up the burned photo. His eye flicked to it, then to Shadow. "You don't remember me?" Emma said, her voice a whisper but full of fire. He hesitated. "I remember the dog. I remember what he did." Shadow growled then. Not at Kyle. At the memory. They sat in the living room. Rain tapping on the roof like a metronome of confession. Kyle laid it all out. Pieces Emma didn't want to hear but had already suspected. Shadow had been part of a black ops program. Unregistered, untraceable, trained for surgical elimination. But something went wrong overseas. An operation spiraled. Orders shifted. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Shadow was blamed. Labeled rogue. Kyle had tried to save him, but the program turned. They left both for dead. "But you weren't dead," Emma said. "No," Kyle replied. "And neither was he." He pulled out a flash drive. Loaded it into the TV. Grainy footage played, body cams, gunfire, screaming. Shadow moving like smoke through chaos. Always ahead of the line. Until one moment a command yelled. A child steps into view. Gunfire stops. Shadow freezes. Then he turns. Against orders. "They called it failure," Kyle said. "I called it instinct." He refused to kill a child. That made him a threat. Emma watched her own memory reflected in those clips. Her hiding under a bed. Her dog barking. Men yelling. Shadow had saved her once before. Long before she even knew his name. Outside, tires rolled slow over gravel. Black SUVs. Headlights off. "They're here," Kyle said. "They want the loose ends tied." He turned to Emma. "You can't come." But she was already moving. "I'm not staying behind again." Shadow stood between them. No leash. No command. Just purpose. They slipped through the back. Into the woods. Emma led them to the clearing where the cache was buried. Kyle opened it. Inside were documents, tapes, a journal. Evidence. Enough to break the entire operation. Kyle looked at Emma. "You're the key. Your parents tried to leak this. They were silenced. You survived. You remember. A shot rang out. Bark exploded from a nearby tree. They ran. Bullets carved the night. Shadow darted between them, blocking, barking, attacking without pause. Kyle returned fire. Emma ran low, heart thudding like a war drum. They reached the abandoned ranger station. Kyle bolted the door behind them. Shadow paced, wounded but silent. Kyle ripped open the first aid kit. This isn't over. Emma opened her backpack. Inside, a tablet, connected to a hidden livestream app. They want silence, she said. Let's give them a stage. She began uploading every file, every photo, every tape, and the world started watching. In the distance, sirens wailed. Outside, headlights flickered on. Inside, Shadow pressed his bloodied paw to the door. The storm had found them again. But this time, they weren't hiding. The warehouse loomed like a forgotten relic of war. Steel walls rusted and humming with secrets. Kyle stood at the edge of the tree line, scanning through binoculars. Inside were cages, dozens. Some held dogs, others held people. Women, children, forgotten by the world, sold like freight. A private army moved through the corridors in silence, earpieces blinking red. They're moving the operation, Kyle said. Once they clear this place, everything disappears. Emma crouched beside him, eyes unblinking. She didn't speak. She just handed him the flash drive. We broadcast. Now we burn it down. Shadow waited behind them, silent, injured, but standing. Always standing. His right leg shook. His side was bandaged with Kyle's torn shirt. And still he didn't blink. They moved in at nightfall. Kyle cut the wire fence while Emma crawled through the opening. Inside, darkness swallowed sound. Emma pressed herself to the wall, tablet in hand, recording everything. She walked past cages. Hands reached out, muffled cries, faces pale with dust and hope. Shadow followed, low to the ground, ears locked forward. Every door past brought a memory. Of concrete rooms, of fire, of her parents. At the center of the warehouse, behind a steel gate, was a room filled with servers, files, weapons. Kyle moved fast, planting flash drives and trackers. Then a voice crackled through the intercom. You never knew when to quit, Brennan. Kyle froze. Eyes narrowed. The door opened. A man stepped in. Military uniform. Polished boots. No name tag. Just power radiating from every word. You brought the girl, he said. And the dog. The whole family reunion. Emma stepped forward. You murdered my parents. The man smiled. They tried to sell secrets that weren't theirs. They paid the price. Kyle reached for his weapon. Too slow. A guard appeared from behind. Gun to his neck. Drop it, the man said. Shadow growled. Your mutt's not trained for this anymore. But before the man could blink, Shadow lunged. Teeth met throat. Screams. Chaos erupted. Emma ducked. Kyle fought the guard hand to hand. Alarms blared. Red lights swept the room. Shadow tore through two more men before collapsing, bleeding out fast. Emma dragged him to cover, crying for the first time in years. You stay with me, she whispered. You don't leave me again. Kyle grabbed a rifle, led her to the cage room, shot the locks. One by one, survivors poured out. They ran, but not away. They fought. A boy no older than 16 tackled a guard. A woman used chains as a whip. It became a storm of vengeance. Emma lifted Shadow onto a dolly cart, wheeling him toward the exit as flames caught on the walls. Kyle stayed behind, planting explosives. One last wire. The traitor officer appeared again, burned, coughing, gun shaking. He raised it at Kyle. Emma screamed, but a shot rang out not from him. From Emma. The officer dropped. Smoke thickened. Kyle limped toward them. It's time. They burst out as the building exploded behind them. Fire lighting up the night sky, like justice screaming across the clouds. Helicopters appeared above. Spotlights. Sirens. Emma collapsed in the grass. Shadow in her arms. Heartbeat slow. Kyle looked at the horizon. It's not over. The files went viral. But they'll come. Emma stroked Shadow's fur. Then let them. The shepherd's eyes opened one last time. And in them, not pain, not fear, peace. He'd done what he was born to do. He protected her. Always. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat. Cameras lined the walls, the world watching through tiny glass screens. Emma sat at the front, small hands folded in her lap, eyes steady. She wore a simple dress and a pin with a shepherd's silhouette over her heart. The judge entered, and the murmurs died. Kyle sat behind her, bandaged and solemn, head low. Across the aisle, men in suits avoided her gaze. Officials, contractors, the silent architects of everything. The operation was real, the evidence undeniable. But they didn't come to confess. They came to discredit, to twist, to bury the truth again. Emma stood when her name was called. No one expected her to speak, but she did. She spoke clearly, no longer a whisper. She told them about the night she lost everything. The fire, the silence that followed, the faces she couldn't forget. She spoke about Shadow, the dog everyone feared, the one who remembered her when no one else did, the one who bled so she could live. The room listened. Every word was a crack in the wall. The prosecution tried to cut her down, called her confused, delusional. But then the video played. The cages, the survivors, the burn marks, the screams, and the silence after the explosion, when Shadow looked back one last time before he fell. It was enough. The verdict came swift. Guilty. Names exposed. Trials ordered. Programs dismantled. Justice didn't erase the pain, but it echoed. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder outside the courthouse. You did what soldiers couldn't. Emma turned to him. We both did. A news anchor tried to ask her a question, but she kept walking. 3 weeks later, the sanctuary opened. A wide field, trees, open sky, fences lined with safety, not fear. A wooden sign carved by Kyle's hands read, Shadow's Rest. Dogs roamed freely, some missing legs, some blind, all survivors. People came from every state, every city, bringing their broken, their forgotten. Emma taught them how to listen, not with commands, but with heart. She stood at the gate one morning, wind playing with her hair. A boy walked up the path, clutching a leash. On the other end, a German shepherd covered in old scars, ears twitching with anxiety. Emma knelt, hand outstretched. The dog flinched, then stepped forward, and licked her palm. The boy smiled. They said he couldn't be fixed. Emma looked at the dog, then at the sky. He's not broken. He just hasn't been understood. Inside her cabin, beside her bed, sat Shadow's collar. Untouched, untarnished, a soldier's medal. Every night she whispered to it, not because she needed to, because he still listened. One evening, Kyle handed her a letter. It was from a girl in another country. She'd watched the live stream, found her own voice because of Emma, found her own dog, abandoned in a ditch, now asleep at her feet every night. See, Kyle said, you started something they can't stop. Emma didn't answer. She just walked into the field, let the dogs run beside her, the wind in their fur like music. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since that fire, she felt peace. Because sometimes, all it takes is a child's heart and a broken dog to bring down an empire. And sometimes, the loudest bark comes from the silence that follows it. If the story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you believe every dog deserves a second chance, drop a heart in the comments below. 1 year later, the world looked different. The case had sparked international reforms, whistleblower protections, and new laws for military K-9 retirement and rescue. But for Emma, none of that filled the space Shadow left behind. The sanctuary thrived, but some nights, when the wind blew just right, she swore she still heard his footsteps behind her. They called her the girl who broke the silence. Survivors from the warehouse sent letters. Strangers mailed collars from fallen dogs with their stories engraved on tags. And yet, none carried the same weight as the worn leather one by her bed. Shadow's collar hadn't moved. She never needed to. One morning, She woke to the sound of barking, frantic, sharp, not like the others. She ran outside. A van had pulled up. No plates. A man in black got out, opened the back doors, and stepped away. Inside were 4 dogs, starved, shaking, one barely breathing. There was no note, just a folder duct taped to the side. Inside, a photo. Shadow, but younger. With him were 3 other shepherds. A note scribbled below. These were his brothers. The last of them, the ones they couldn't break. Emma's knees hit the grass. The oldest one stepped out, eyes clouded but aware. He limped toward her, stopped, then bowed his head the way Shadow once had. Kyle helped carry them into the clinic. The smallest wouldn't wake up. Another had burns along his back. But they were alive, survivors of the same nightmare. Emma spent the night beside them, whispering the way she used to, the way that made Shadow stay. Over weeks they healed, each one with their own scars, their own silence. She named them Ember, Flint, Ghost, and Valor. One evening, Ghost, who hadn't made a sound since arriving, sprinted through the field, barked once, then stood at the edge of the tree line. Emma followed. There, half buried beneath leaves, was a metal box. She opened it. Inside, a flash drive, coordinates, and a short note. You freed us. Now free the others. Kyle mapped the coordinates. Dozens of abandoned compounds, some overseas. Shadow's brothers had been the beginning. It wasn't over. They started recording everything. Emma turned her sanctuary into more than a rescue. It became a broadcast center, a safe house, a voice. Survivors came. Volunteers trained. They called it Operation Sentinel. Every rescued dog carried a story. Some had been tools, others test subjects. Every one of them found their way to her. She taught them trust again. She taught them that their lives had value beyond obedience. In one interview, a reporter asked her if she ever felt afraid, taking on the people still watching. Emma smiled once. Shadow taught me that silence is sometimes the loudest weapon. One night, Ember woke the entire house with her barking. Kyle rushed out. Package sat at the gate. No name, no return. Inside was a hard drive. Footage from a secret training site. Dogs screaming. Commands in foreign languages. A logo on the wall. One that had been scrubbed from every military record. They uploaded it. In 24 hours, the world erupted again. The government denied everything. But the evidence spoke. And Emma? She didn't back down. The girl who saved one dog had become the voice for all of them. In the final scene of a documentary filmed at the sanctuary, Emma walks through the field as the dogs run beside her. Overhead, the wind picks up. The camera holds on her face as she looks toward the trees. And for a split second, there's a blur. A shape, a shadow, standing just at the edge, watching. Then gone. She smiles. Because she knows. Some warriors never leave. They just run ahead to clear the path. And the ones they protected, they never stop walking it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you believe every broken soul deserves a second chance, leave a heart for Shadow. He's still watching.